The sun wasn't even up when the bolt cutters bit through my fence, but I was already watching. My coffee hadn't cooled, and there he was, a HOA officer, Marcus Finley, in his neon vest, sneaking onto my property like he was defusing a bomb. He had no idea the ranch he just trespassed on belonged to the sheriff of the entire county. Me? That was the moment I stopped sipping and started smiling. Some people wake up to roosters. I woke up to lawsuits walking into a trap. Marcus didn't even glance at the cameras. He strutted like he owned the place. Clipboard under one arm, bolt cutters in the other. He stepped over the cut chain with the grace of a man who thought paperwork protected him. He paused to scribble something, probably a citation for unauthorized fencing or some nonsense, and headed toward the irrigation lines like he just discovered a new species of grass. The man had the arrogance of someone who never got told no as a child and clearly hadn't learned to fear the word as an adult. My ranch is about 160 acres of well-maintained fields, weathered fences, and peace I fought hard to keep. It's not a manicured cul-de-sac with dog-walking schedules. It's real land, and it breathes with the kind of freedom HOA rule books can't leash. But Marcus had decided, for reasons known only to his inflated ego, that part of my property looked communal and might be under HOA care due to historical restricting. I'd laughed out loud the first time he said that. The second time, I'd warned him. The third, he brought bolt cutters. I got in my truck without a word, left my coffee half full. My German Shepherd, Ranger, jumped into the passenger seat like he could smell the stupid brewing. The gravel crunched under the tires as we rolled out. The ranch bathed in golden fog. By the time I reached the cut gate, Marcus was crouched by my irrigation line, pointing and talking into a headset like he was part of a SWAT team. He looked up when I parked, not startled, just annoyed. That smug kind of annoyed you only see on people who think their title makes them bulletproof. He stood, brushing off his khakis. "Sheriff Cole," he said flatly, like my name left a bad taste in his mouth. "We're conducting a survey for the HOA. Some possible violations on your perimeter." "This land's not part of your HOA," I replied, stepping out of the truck. Marcus gave a slow, theatrical sigh. He gestured toward the fields like he was showing off a prize on a game show. "According to updated boundary assessments, these plots might qualify as shared-use buffer zones between the residential area and county-owned parcels." "You mean my hayfield? Technically, pending legal review." "No, Marcus. Not technically, not pending, not possibly. This land is deeded, fenced, and registered under my name. You cut a locked gate and walked in without permission. That's trespassing." He smiled like I just offered him lemonade. "With all due respect, Sheriff, HOAs are often granted implied access when municipal borders are unclear." I took a step closer. "I'm not talking about municipal policy. I'm talking about criminal trespass." His eyes flicked to the ranger, who was sitting like a statue in the truck bed, ears up. "That your dog?" "He's my deputy." Marcus chuckled but took a half step back. "Now, Sheriff, let's not turn this into something bigger than it needs to be." I leaned in. "You already did, Marcus. You walked onto a ranch owned by the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in this county and vandalized private property." He stiffened. "You wouldn't actually arrest me." "Try me." There was a long pause. He finally looked around, as if realizing for the first time how big this ranch really was, how far away the nearest subdivision sat. No sidewalks, no cul-de-sacs, just grass, sky, and laws that don't need a homeowner's manual to exist. He muttered something about reviewing legal documentation and turned back toward the gate. He climbed through the broken fence and walked away like he hadn't just committed multiple infractions in the span of 15 minutes. I didn't stop him. Not yet. I stood there for a moment after he left, the wind brushing through the grass like it was whispering all the ways this could end. Ranger jumped down, sniffed the spot where Marcus had stood, and let out a low growl. Back at the house, I pulled up the security footage again. Clear, high-res video of Marcus cutting the lock, trespassing, marking property, and walking deep into restricted ranch land. He even looked at the camera once, waved actually, like he thought it was a doorbell cam. I transferred the footage to a drive and set it next to my badge. I wasn't going to file charges yet. Not because I was letting him off easy, but because I knew men like Marcus. They don't stop when you tell them to. They stop when they fall into a hole they dug themselves. I sat back down, grabbed my now cold coffee, and watched the sunrise. This wasn't about grass height or fencing material. This was about power, about someone who thought their clipboard gave them more authority than the Constitution. I looked out the window and smiled. Let him come back. Next time, I wouldn't just be watching. I'd be waiting. It didn't even take a week. I knew he'd come back. And sure enough, that same HOA vest appeared at the end of my fence line right after sunrise. But this time, Marcus didn't come alone. He brought a landscaping crew with him. 4 guys in matching polos towing weed trimmers, shovels, and paint cans in the back of a rented truck. Marcus stepped out like he was overseeing a road construction project. Clipboard in hand again, sunglasses perched on his nose like he was about to sell insurance. The audacity was impressive. He waved one arm, and the crew jumped into action, starting to measure distances from the fence to the pasture and spray orange paint lines across my gravel path. I sat in my truck, parked a few yards away and half hidden by the tall grass. I watched the entire thing like it was a bad play unfolding on my own property. They marked up my hay bales, pulled out stakes, and one guy even started digging near the water line with a metal rod, like he was checking for utilities. Marcus was talking into a headset again, pacing up and down as if he were the foreman of some state-funded project. One of the workers rolled out red flag markers and started placing them along the edge of the field. It looked like they were dividing up land for sale. By the time I pulled up and stepped out, they had already marked nearly a quarter of my eastern lot. I stood by the gate, arms crossed, boots in the dirt, and waited. Marcus didn't even look surprised. If anything, he looked irritated that I'd showed up again. "Morning, Sheriff," he said, like we were neighbors running into each other at the post office, just conducting a community survey. "You brought a landscaping crew to conduct a survey." "A routine perimeter inspection," he clarified, "part of the HOA's visual compliance program. You'll see this often in overlapping rural zones." I nodded slowly, glancing at the paint lines on my hay bales. "That's livestock feed you're spraying on." He didn't even blink. "Temporary markings. They'll fade in a few days. We're only assessing visual obstruction violations." "On my property?" He sighed as if I was the one being difficult. "These lines help determine shared view rights and possible visibility easements." "This is ranchland. The only thing I'm blocking is sunlight with tall grass." Marcus took a step forward, gesturing with his clipboard. "According to some newly reviewed records from the subdivision board, there are old notations that portions of this ranch may qualify as unassigned community buffer space. We're simply clarifying ownership before the next HOA general meeting. That's the second time you've used the word may. I want to be real clear about something. You don't have authority here, not even close. This isn't unclaimed space. It's deeded, surveyed, fenced, and registered with the county clerk's office." One of the workers interrupted, holding up a small broken pipe. "Think we nicked something." I walked over to the spot and crouched. Sure enough, one of the rods they jammed into the ground had punctured the irrigation pipe that fed my lower pasture. Water was bubbling up through the dirt. Marcus didn't even bother to look. I stood up and pointed. "That's a $1,000 repair. You just damaged a water line that feeds livestock. You and your crew are about 5 minutes away from a criminal mischief charge." Marcus folded his arms. "I'd advise you to calm down, Sheriff. Getting heated won't help clarify property lines." I radioed my deputy, told her to bring the survey maps and the restraining order paperwork we prepped, just in case. Then I turned back to Marcus and smiled. "I'm not heated. I'm documenting. You remember those cameras I have all over the property. Every move you've made this morning is being recorded. The footage will be added to your existing violation case. Your presence here is illegal, and as of this moment, your crew is operating on private property without consent or contract." One of the landscapers looked up, clearly realizing this wasn't some routine job. Marcus signaled them with a half-hearted wave to pack up. The crew started rolling up paint lines and tossing the red flags back into the truck. The guy who hit the pipe looked pale. I walked them all back toward the gate, Marcus trailing behind. Just before they reached the road, my deputy pulled up. She stepped out with a folder in hand, full of parcel maps, legal plats, and the official boundary records signed by the county surveyor. She handed them to Marcus without saying a word. He flipped through the pages. His face changed. I could tell he hadn't seen these versions. The survey clearly showed that not only was my ranch not part of the HOA zone, but that the subdivision itself ended more than 50 feet from my eastern fence line. There was no overlap, no gray area, no buffer zone, just wishful thinking and a lot of wrong assumptions. Marcus handed the folder back, visibly rattled. "This doesn't match what I have on file," he said. "Then your file is wrong," I replied. There was a long silence. He turned to go, but my deputy stopped him. "You'll also be receiving a temporary restraining order," she said, "issued this morning, signed by the magistrate. It prohibits any further entry onto Sheriff Cole's property by you or any HOA representatives, pending full legal review." Marcus's jaw clenched. He looked at me like I'd just insulted his ancestors. "This isn't over," he muttered. I smiled. "It is for today." As they drove off, I took one last look at the damage. Spray paint on my hay, holes in the irrigation line, red flags still fluttering in the wind. But none of it bothered me because I wasn't angry. I was patient. Marcus had just taken one step too far, and I wasn't going to stop him. I was going to let him walk right into the storm he didn't even see coming. It started small. A yellow envelope taped to my gate. Inside was a citation for having an unauthorized structure on the property. The structure in question was my barn, built in 1989, permitted and logged with the county. The note claimed it didn't match the architectural style of surrounding homes. That alone made me laugh. My nearest neighbor was a half-mile down a dirt road. The second citation arrived 2 days later. Improper livestock containment. Then another. Excess grass height near a roadway, and another. Unapproved paint color on a secondary structure. The list kept growing. By the end of the week, I had a stack of envelopes thicker than a feed catalog. I didn't even bother opening most of them after the first 5. I knew what this was. Marcus couldn't get onto the property anymore, so he decided to drown me in paperwork instead. His goal was obvious: intimidation by volume. Confuse the target. Bury them in nonsense. Hope something sticks. I'd seen it before when I worked investigations. Bureaucratic harassment dressed up as civic duty. Only this time, he picked the wrong rancher. I went to the county office that afternoon, walked straight into the clerk's records room and asked for every zoning map, boundary file, and HOA charter associated with the Whispering Hills subdivision. The clerk raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. She knew who I was. I took the files home and spent the evening reading through legal language so twisted it could choke a lawyer. But by midnight, I had what I needed: a definitive map showing that my land sat entirely outside any HOA claim. Not just now, always. Since the day the subdivision was built, my ranch had never been part of it. The next morning, I got a call from a local realtor I knew. He asked if I was thinking of selling the east pasture. I told him no and asked why he thought I was. He said someone from the HOA board had contacted his office asking for evaluation. Said the HOA was looking to reclaim underutilized green space adjacent to community lands. That's when I realized Marcus wasn't just being annoying. He was building a case trying to get the HOA to seize land they didn't own through some convoluted claim of community usage. I hung up and stared out the window at the pasture beyond my fence. That open stretch of grass had become a battlefield. The next day, I noticed a new wooden post just outside my eastern gate. Attached to it was a laminated sign with the HOA's logo. It read "Proposed Future Development Site, Pending Review." There was no permit, no approval, just bold letters and Marcus's imagination. I walked up to it with Ranger trotting beside me and yanked the sign out of the ground. It came up easy. No concrete, just planted like a flag in a game he hadn't won yet. I called the county zoning office and asked them to do a site visit, not because I needed validation, but because I wanted every move documented by a neutral third party. When the inspector arrived, I didn't say a word. Just walked him around the property, showed him the flagged areas, the broken irrigation, the fence Marcus cut, and now the new sign. He took photos, asked a few questions, and nodded as he left. I knew what that meant. He'd seen enough. Later that week, one of my deputies caught sight of Marcus walking along the county access road near the pasture again. He wasn't stepping onto my land, just hovering close enough to be annoying. He had a camera this time, taking photos, probably trying to gather some visual record of what he'd call encroachment. I didn't bother confronting him. He was collecting ammo, but he didn't realize every piece of it was made of rubber, useless once it hit anything solid. What he didn't know was that I'd installed new motion-activated cameras along the full eastern fence line. High resolution, night vision, the works. I had 3 weeks of footage, every step he took, every word he said to contractors, every time he paused at the edge of the road, staring like he could will my property into his HOA. I had copies stored in 3 different places. He could twist the truth all he wanted. I had the whole story on video. Then came the envelope that really pushed the line. It was thicker than the others and delivered by hand to my mailbox. Inside was a formal claim from the HOA, requesting immediate cessation of all ranch operations on a quarter-acre stretch of land near the community's walking trail. They claimed the land had been used by residents for years and qualified as a shared-use green space. They included photographs. Not one of them showed any actual community use, just images of an empty field and blurry trees. But one detail caught my eye. In the background of one photo, you could clearly see a no trespassing sign. My sign. On my land. They were using photos of trespassing to prove communal use. That was when I knew I had him. I didn't file a complaint. Not yet. I wanted him to keep pushing. I wanted him to get so confident in his made-up case that he took one step too far. I'd seen this pattern before. Small lies lead to bigger ones. Petty actions escalate into full-blown overreach. And when someone like Marcus thinks he's winning, that's when they make the mistake that costs them everything. I printed out the photos, highlighted the signs, organized the timestamps. I reviewed the county maps again, highlighted every boundary. I took screenshots from my surveillance footage showing Marcus planting the sign, directing workers, and pointing at things like he was on a TV show. Then I waited. I knew he was going to come back. And the next time he did, I wouldn't just be ready. I'd be holding the rope for the trap he built with his own hands. Some men stop when you tell them no. Others only stop when they're standing in front of a judge. I had a feeling Marcus was going to be the second kind. The invitation was printed on glossy cardstock with gold trim and a big smiling HOA logo at the top. It was titled Community Pride Appreciation Day and promised live music, food trucks, and a family-friendly celebration of shared neighborhood values. The location listed was what made me pause. East Meadow Trailhead, just past Whispering Hills. That trailhead didn't exist. That was my pasture. The very same quarter acre they claimed had community value. It wasn't just trespassing anymore. Marcus was hosting a full public event on my land. I didn't say a word to anyone. Not the sheriff's office, not my deputy, not even my neighbor. I just waited, watched as trucks rolled in that morning with tents, bounce houses, and food stands. A sound crew set up speakers facing my open field. Someone parked a popcorn machine right next to my fencing, which had been quietly pulled down at the eastern edge to create an opening. By mid-morning, there were folding tables, coolers full of sodas, and a banner flapping that said, "Welcome to HOA Family Fest." It was bold. It was loud. It was a disaster waiting to happen. I sat in my truck with the windows up and engine off, parked behind a row of trees just inside the north fence line. I had a drone in the air already recording. It caught footage of cars lining up on the access road, kids running through my pasture, and one woman laying out picnic blankets beneath my maple tree. Marcus strutted across the grass like he was the mayor of some small town, high-fiving people and nodding to music I could barely hear. Every move was captured, every footstep recorded. It was all unfolding exactly how I'd hoped. By noon, The property looked like a carnival. Families walked around with cotton candy. A man was grilling burgers near my hay bales. The bounce house had kids bouncing so hard it leaned sideways. A woman was selling neighborhood-branded T-shirts with slogans like "Proud to be HOA Strong." I spotted 3 members of the HOA board handing out flyers. One of them, Karen, a woman with blonde highlights and permanent frown lines, walked up to a pair of elderly folks and said, "Thank you for supporting the reclamation of community land." I zoomed the drone in on that moment, made sure I caught the words on audio. Then I stepped out of the truck. I didn't bring a siren or lights. I didn't need them. I wore my badge, my boots, and my uniform. Ranger followed at my side, ears alert and tongue hanging loose. I walked slowly through the field, heading right into the heart of the crowd. It took about 30 seconds before someone noticed. A woman holding a lemonade froze and tapped the man beside her. They both turned to look. Whispers spread fast. By the time I reached the bounce house, most of the board members had seen me, but Marcus was still holding court near the barbecue stand, laughing with a clipboard in hand. I approached from the side. He didn't see me until I was 6 feet away. "Sheriff Cole," he said, startled, "I didn't expect to see you here today. I didn't expect to find half your HOA throwing a party on my ranch." Marcus straightened. He looked around as if trying to figure out what to say. "We're celebrating the community spirit. This location was chosen based on its proximity to shared zones that—" "Stop." I held up one hand. "I'm not here for debate. I'm here because you are hosting a public event on private land, and as of this moment, everyone here is trespassing." There was a long silence. He blinked, confused. "You can't be serious," he said finally. "This land has been used by the community for—" "No, it hasn't. You planted signs and photoshopped maps and sent fake citations. You cut my fence, sprayed my hay, and now you've thrown a public event without a single permit. I have drone footage of every minute. I have footage of you directing vendors. I have timestamps, facial recognition, and security records. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is willful trespass." People around us had started to stop what they were doing. A few food vendors were already packing up. Parents were calling for their kids. The bounce house deflated slowly, one side sagging like a melting tent. The HOA board members, including Karen, huddled near a folding table, whispering and looking pale. Marcus tried to recover. "This is a misunderstanding. If you just allow us time to contact legal." "You had time. You had warnings. You had documents handed to you by my deputy and the county office, and you ignored every one of them." He looked furious now. His lips pressed into a tight line. He opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "You're under arrest for trespassing, vandalism, and illegal use of private property for public assembly. Put the clipboard down." There was an audible gasp from someone behind him. Marcus's hands shook slightly, but he lowered the clipboard. "You're making a mistake, Sheriff. The community supports this. Then they can watch you get cuffed for it." I turned him around and secured the cuffs. Ranger stood nearby, watching silently. A few people began to film. One teenager said something like, "That guy's an HOA. This is awesome." I led Marcus through the crowd, his head bowed and jaw clenched. He didn't say another word. No one tried to stop me. My deputy met me at the gate, and we loaded Marcus into the back of the patrol car. He sat stone-faced, looking ahead like someone had flipped off the switch in his brain. I handed her the drive with the drone footage and told her to submit it to evidence. Then I stood at the gate and watched as the remaining tents were pulled down. The T-shirt vendor vanished. A cooler tipped over and spilled ice onto the grass. Within 30 minutes, my pasture was empty again, torn, trampled, littered with paper cups and broken steaks, but empty. I didn't feel victorious. I felt precise, calculated, like I just pulled the last move in a long game. Marcus had played checkers. I played chess. Now it was my turn to wait while the board cleared and the legal process took over. What he built on arrogance had just collapsed on evidence. The courtroom smelled like dust and old carpet, the kind of place where time moved slower and egos deflated fast. I sat on the left side near the front, uniform pressed, hands folded. My deputy sat behind me with a folder thick enough to use as a doorstop. Across the aisle sat Marcus Finley, his face tight, suit wrinkled at the elbows like he had been sweating through it since dawn. His lawyer, some young man with flashy shoes and big city confidence, flipped through pages like they contained spells. He had no idea the storm he was about to walk into. The judge was a woman named Holloway, the kind who didn't smile much and didn't blink often. When she walked in, everyone stood like their knees had been trained by law school. She nodded once and sat down, then adjusted her glasses and looked straight at Marcus's lawyer. "Let's hear it," she said, not unkind but impatient. And just like that, the circus began. Marcus's lawyer stood up and started strong. He said his client had been acting in accordance with community interest. He said the event held on my land was a good faith mistake based on incomplete boundary data. He even tried to argue that the HOA had a history of shared land agreements, and that Marcus had reason to believe he was within legal limits. He painted a picture of my ranch as a blurry zone between rural property and neighborhood development. He said Marcus was a volunteer leader doing his best in a complicated situation. I didn't interrupt. I didn't even blink, because I knew what was coming. The judge turned to me next. "Sheriff Cole," she said, "your side." I stood up, nodded once, and handed the clerk a flash drive. "Your Honor, on this drive is full surveillance footage from my property, including timestamps, aerial drone footage of the illegal event, and audio recordings of the defendant planning and executing the trespass. I also have printed county survey maps, certified land records, and copies of the restraining order served to the defendant 2 weeks prior to the event in question." The clerk plugged in the drive. I asked them to start the video at the moment Marcus directed the food vendors onto my property. The room fell silent. On screen, there was Marcus in his vest, clipboard in hand, pointing toward my hayfield and waving people in like a parking attendant. The judge leaned forward slightly. The video continued. It showed Marcus standing next to the barbecue pit, laughing, drinking lemonade, and ignoring a large sign on my fence that clearly read, "Private ranch land, no unauthorized access." The courtroom shifted. I could feel the weight of it. Marcus's lawyer stood frozen, mouth open slightly. I passed the printed maps forward next. They showed my property lines going back 30 years, with the HOA's territory stopping well before the disputed pasture. The judge flipped through them, pausing once to raise an eyebrow at a highlighted section that made it clear the event had taken place deep inside my boundaries. "Do you have anything else, Sheriff Cole?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. I'd like to call the county zoning commissioner as a witness." She nodded. "Bring him in." The commissioner was a quiet man with a slow way of speaking that made people listen harder. He sat down and confirmed under oath that my land was not, and had never been, part of the HOA district. He also testified that the recent claim made by Marcus and the board to seize the quarter-acre was not only false, but never formally submitted. It was all paper theater. No legal backing, no filings, just noise. The judge took off her glasses and stared at Marcus. "You were served a restraining order. You hosted a public event on private land. You ignored clear boundaries, both physical and legal. Do you have any explanation for this behavior?" Marcus stood, red-faced, his voice shaking slightly. "I believe the land was misfiled. I believe I was acting in the community's best interest. Belief does not override fact," the judge replied sharply. She turned to the clerk. "All citations filed by the HOA against Sheriff Cole are hereby nullified and stricken from record. Furthermore, the HOA is ordered to pay for all damages to his property, including irrigation repair, fence replacement, and cleanup fees. Lastly, Mr. Finley, you are stripped of any HOA enforcement authority and barred from approaching Sheriff Cole's property indefinitely." Marcus's lawyer tried to say something, but she held up a hand. "No more. I've heard enough. Court is adjourned." The gavel hit the bench. People started to move, but I stayed seated for a moment, letting it all settle. Marcus stood like a man who just stepped into a hole and realized it was a grave. He didn't look at me. He didn't speak. He just gathered his things, now silent, smaller than he had been just an hour ago. Outside the courthouse, the sun was bright and hot. My deputy handed me the copy of the judgment, and I folded it neatly and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Around us, people whispered, shook their heads, talked about what they had just seen. Some were members of the HOA who had once supported Marcus. They looked rattled now, unsure of what came next. I knew what came next. This wasn't just about my ranch anymore. Marcus had tried to stretch the limits of a neighborhood charter until it broke, and it had snapped right back in his face. I had the ruling. I had the footage. I had the full backing of the county. And more importantly, I had the patience to wait for it all to come crashing down exactly when it needed to. That night, I walked the fence line by lantern light. Repaired posts stood firm, fresh wire taut against the wooden frames. The pasture was quiet again, the kind of quiet that only comes after a storm clears. Ranger walked ahead of me, nose to the ground, tail relaxed. In the distance, the moon reflected off the irrigation lines, now fully repaired. My land was mine again, and this time there was no doubt. The week after the trial was quiet but not uneventful. Whispers moved through the county like wind through dry grass. People who had never cared about property lines before were suddenly studying maps and deeds like they were exam papers. HOA board members started stepping down one by one, citing stress and lack of clarity in leadership. Marcus disappeared from public sight entirely. His house went dark, his car unmoved, his signature clipboard nowhere in sight. No more citations showed up on anyone's fences. The HOA message boards went silent, then vanished altogether. Something big had broken, and everyone could feel it. Then came a call from a man named Martin, owner of the parcel that bordered my east pasture. He was an old rancher, quiet type, had moved to town a few years ago and leased his land out to the HOA for community events. Turns out his lease was expiring, and he was considering putting the whole parcel up for sale. He didn't trust the HOA anymore. He had seen what they did to me and didn't want his land being used for any more stunts. He asked if I knew anyone who might be interested in buying it. I told him I'd think about it and hung up. 3 days later, I sat in a small back office at the county land registry, signing paperwork under an alias. It wasn't deception, just strategy. I had no desire to give the HOA a new headline about the sheriff gobbling up their former event space, but I wasn't about to let them try again on someone else's soil either. That land was too close to mine and too tempting for anyone with a clipboard and an attitude. I bought the parcel in full, quietly, legally, completely. The next morning, I walked the new fence line. It was still open in some spots, but most of the posts were standing. I brought in a local contractor to finish the job. Thick wood, barbed wire top, strong gates at either end. Then I added something new, hand-carved wooden signs at both entrances, bold letters etched deep into oak, private ranch property, no HOA access. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Not a threat, just the law. Within a week, I noticed the reaction. A few HOA members drove slowly past the new fence, staring through their windows like they couldn't believe the land they once used for barbecues and bounce houses was now locked up tight. A flyer was posted at their clubhouse stating the annual HOA summer picnic had been postponed indefinitely. Some neighbors nodded at me in quiet approval at the feed store. Others avoided eye contact. I didn't care either way. I wasn't looking for applause. I was making a point. Then came the final blow. A developer had been working with the HOA on plans to build a small recreational center near that same plot of land. It had been one of Marcus's pet projects, though most of it was still on paper. When they found out I had purchased the land and revoked all community access, the entire project collapsed. No parking, no road access, no permit. I didn't even have to say no. The zoning board simply stamped it denied and moved on. One morning, I saw a moving truck outside Marcus's house. No one else was around. Just two guys hauling boxes down the steps and an old trailer with a dented side. I didn't need to ask where he was going. I already knew he was leaving, selling his house at a loss and slipping away without a single word. No apology, no explanation, just silence and an empty porch, a chapter closing without ceremony. I took no pleasure in his downfall, but I took satisfaction in the justice of it. He had trespassed, lied, manipulated, and thought no one would hold him accountable. But this time, someone did. And not just someone. A sheriff, a rancher, a man with the law on his side and patience in his bones. The land felt different now, lighter, like it had finally been cleared of something sour in the soil. I rode the fence line one evening with Ranger jogging beside the four-wheeler. We passed the new signs, the repaired gates, and the fresh stretch of quiet pasture that used to be a target. Now it was just grass and wind again. No spray paint, no fake flags, no noise. That night, I built a fire behind the barn. Just me, the stars, and a pot of coffee heating on the iron grate. Ranger lay curled near my boots, tail flicking gently. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the hum of the night. Coyotes yipped in the distance. An owl called from the old cottonwood. Everything felt in its place. It had taken weeks of watching, waiting, and holding the line. But the line had held. The funny thing is, when you wear a badge, people think you only enforce what's written. But sometimes you enforce what's right, what's fair, what protects the land and the people who tend it. That's the part Marcus never understood. Rules aren't about control. They're about respect. And when you lose that, no title or clipboard can save you. I poured another cup of coffee and watched the embers glow. Tomorrow would be just another day. Fence to mend, livestock to feed, miles to walk. But tonight, the land was quiet and the storm was over. And for the first time in a long while, I knew it would stay that way. The first time I saw them coming down the driveway, I thought they were lost. Two sedans, clean and quiet, crawling up the gravel like they weren't sure they belonged there. I stood on the porch with Ranger beside me, wiping my hands on a rag after fixing the latch on the barn gate. When the doors opened, I recognized a few of the faces, former HOA board members. One of them was Karen, the woman who had handed out flyers at the illegal event. Another was the man who had posted those fabricated citations about grass height. None of them had come up this drive before, and now here they were, standing like kids called to the principal's office. I didn't move. I waited. The older man in front stepped forward and took off his hat. "Sheriff," he said carefully, "we wanted to come by in person. We owe you an apology." I didn't answer right away. I let the silence sit for a few seconds. We didn't know what Marcus was doing. Not really. The man went on. We saw pieces, but we didn't question it. We trusted him to manage the paperwork and handle community issues. We let it go too far. Karen stepped beside him. We wanted to say sorry. Some of us never agreed with the way he went about things, but we didn't stop him either. That was our mistake. Another man nodded and spoke up. "A few of us have stepped down from the board. The rest are talking about disbanding it completely. We don't want this kind of power fight anymore. It's not worth it. It's not who we are." I looked at them, not angry, just tired of the drama. "You could have stopped it. You had every chance. We know." I took a breath and nodded toward the porch. "Come up. I've got coffee on." They seemed surprised but grateful. They walked slowly, like folks who weren't sure if they deserved kindness and were ready to earn it. I poured 4 mugs and handed them out. We sat on the porch in quiet for a bit, the breeze pushing through the cottonwoods and the sun starting to dip behind the far hill. Ranger laid by my feet, calm but watchful. We talked for a while, nothing formal, no rehearsed speeches, just real words. They asked about the fencing, the livestock, the land boundaries. I told them the history of the ranch, how long it had been in the family, how many times I'd seen good neighbors ruined by bad boards. We didn't talk about lawsuits or citations. We talked about people, the ones who still respected a handshake, the ones who mended fences instead of breaking them. Eventually, they stood to leave. The man with the hat turned before stepping off the porch. "You ever think about running for county judge?" he asked. "We'd vote for you." I smiled a little. "I'm good right here." They left quietly, their cars raising dust as they rolled back toward the paved roads and cul-de-sacs. I watched until they disappeared, then went inside and set the mugs in the sink. The kitchen window caught the last bit of sun spilling over the eastern field. The field that used to be under threat, now just grass and peace. A few days later, I hosted a cookout. Not for revenge, not for show, just because it was time. The sheriff's office brought folding chairs. My neighbors brought pies and fresh bread. A few old-timers played fiddle near the barn. Kids ran through the pasture, dodging fence posts and tossing frisbees. Someone hung string lights across the front yard, and the whole place looked like something out of a storybook. People came I didn't expect. Former HOA members, retired ranchers, even the zoning commissioner who brought a lemon cake and stayed until after sunset. It wasn't about sides anymore. It was about showing up and staying long enough to listen. I gave a short speech, standing near the fire pit with a plate in one hand and Ranger at my heel. Nothing fancy, just the truth. I said what happened was a lesson. That ownership isn't just about paper and borders. It's about respect, about knowing where your reach ends and someone else's begins. That good fences don't just make good neighbors, they make peace possible, and that if anyone needed help or clarity on their own landlines, I'd walk them myself and shake their hand at the gate. The crowd clapped, not loud but honest. Then someone started up a tune, and before I knew it, there were people dancing in the dust and laughing under the stars. No committees, no citations, just people being people. Later that night, I walked the perimeter with a flashlight. The land was quiet. No signs out of place, no flags, no voices in the dark where they shouldn't be. Just crickets and the low call of night birds. The same kind of quiet that had made me fall in love with this ranch in the first place. I reached the east gate and paused. The wooden sign still stood firm. Private ranch property. No HOA access. It wasn't just a warning anymore. It was history. A marker of where things had gone wrong and where they had finally been made right. Ranger brushed against my leg and sat down, eyes scanning the trees. I knelt beside him and scratched behind his ears. "Good boy," I said. He leaned into my hand, tail tapping the dirt. We walked back slow, the flashlight cutting soft lines through the grass. I thought about the months behind me, the trespass, the games, the trial, the purchase, the signs. All of it layered on top of this land like weathered footprints. And now, finally, the wind had started to cover them. A new season was coming. Clean, simple, mine. At the porch, I paused and looked back. The stars had come out full, scattered across the sky like salt on a black table. Somewhere in town, Marcus was unpacking in a new place. Maybe he had learned something. Maybe not. Either way, this land would never be under his shadow again. I stepped inside, closed the door gently, and let the night settle in around me. The house was still, the ranch was whole, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the first bolt cutter touched my gate. Peace.